When I told him I wanted to speak to the congregation, I didn't mean like this, but I'm very excited to do it, but I'm a little nervous. Um, so I just want to thank you all for allowing me to share space with you today. And I just want to put first and foremost, while I don't identify with any one particular religion, I'm deeply spiritual, and many concepts from religion resonate with me in my work. So again, my name is Kendra Clark. First and foremost, I'm a formerly incarcerated Forest Hills resident. So I live about 10 minutes from here. I've lived in this community for about 8 years, and I have, been in and out of jail extensively throughout my life, right? And so I'll get into some of that story. And I think at the core, as Reverend Jeff said, I'm definitely an activist. And Charlotte, I believe is your name, the reading this morning, I'm an environmental activist as well. So it was just funny how that was the reading for this morning, and all the work that I've done on closing Rikers. I also helped draft the renewable Rikers legislation, which would close the peaker plants around the city, put solar energy panels on the island, and really clean up our water wasteways as well. So Exodus, I'm the VP of Policy and Strategy with Exodus, and we're a preventative reentry and advocacy organization. And we have a resident pastor that's on site. Exodus was founded in 1999 after our founder spent 12 years inside prison. And he always saw people cycling in and out. And he then realized it wasn't just the prison sentence that impacted people, it was when they were released. There was not a lot of resources, and there was a lot of shut doors. And so people ended up staying in crime as opposed to kind of getting out of it. And so it was a bunch of long timers, they called themselves, that were inside, that formed Exodus Transitional Community. And it's really around the book of Exodus, how you have to walk through the wilderness in order to get to the promised land. So even our workforce development program is called the Wilderness Workshop. And so again, we have, deep roots in the church and in faith, and we're interfaith. So I'm really blessed that I get to see all different kinds of religion practiced. And it's just such a beautiful space to see people come together, and how many concepts are similar across the board of religions, right? So I'll share a little bit of a story of my personal story and kind of why activism is important to me. So originally, my mom was 15 when she had me, and I come from a village of 850 people. And my biological father had graduated high school and just left while my mother was pregnant. She was a sophomore in high school. And, my childhood, I always remember hearing stories about how she was kicked off the cheerleading squad because it made the school look tacky, even though it was a village of 850 people. And so I learned about classism and poverty and at a very early age. And I think that actually played into my mom's trauma that she experienced, and why she married my stepdad when I was a year and a half old, because he was not a good man. But I think that through all of her trials and tribulations, and being so young and pregnant, and kind of being kicked out of the town, right, or kind of ostracized from the town at such an early age, she kind of married the first man she thought loved her, right? And so he went in the military. We moved down to Florida. And, my first really memories of my childhood was my mom was a farmhand, and we lived in a single wide trailer on cement blocks so the alligators couldn't get in the door. And she took care of all the cattle for some really wealthy people. They had a mansion on the property. We were not allowed to go in it. So again, like from a very early age, I knew what classism and poverty and discrimination kind of were. And while during that time in Florida were also some of my best memories too, as my mom, because my stepdad wasn't there because he was in the military. So he was gone for long periods of time. So I do have some really fond memories of spending time with my mom there. I think my life changed really drastically when my stepdad left the military. We moved back to the village where my mother was from. And, my stepdad had a lot of trauma, I think, in his own right, that he did not take care of, and instead he kind of pushed it off on the family. So, I grew up in a very abusive household. My mom and my dad drank a lot. I experienced abuse at every level. I always remember my stepdad would get home and he was already drunk by the time he would get home from work. So you already knew walking in the door, there was going to be abuse and violence. And that's really how I thought was normal. I think I look back at it now, and even if we were to try to call the police, if my stepdad was beating us, the cops were 90 miles away because it was a village of 850 people. You don't have your own police force, right? I still to this day don't ever remember hearing anything about like ACS or somebody that you could call, right? As a child, even with school, we had one counselor and the whole school knew what was going on, but it was kind of one of those things that you just didn't talk about and you rushed it under the rug and you just kind of had to deal with it and move forward. Um, so, you know, my grandma, and it's funny when I met with Reverend Jeff, my grandma was in Presbyterian church for my whole life. I grew up in the church. And it was about 8, 9 years old when I didn't understand why so many bad things kept happening to me, and I really lost my faith. I quit going to church. My grandma did Sunday school my whole life, and I just stopped going. I couldn't understand it. I think that was really like the point for me where I was just in a crossroads, and I was definitely lost. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know how to get out of it, and I didn't have any support to get out of it. And I think I blamed God at a lot of times when I was 9, right, and not understanding what was going on. And now I'm so happy that I can see it from a different perspective and kind of look at things differently. And at that time, I started doing drugs and alcohol myself at 10 years old. And again, it was, I knew I was going to get beat when I got home. So it was much easier for me to do whatever substances I could do to get through that night, right? And that's really how my addiction started. I ran away a lot. Again, the school really couldn't help. I would get kicked out of school because I would miss school. It was kind of this whole like cycle, and no matter where I went, I just couldn't get out of it. So I began getting arrested at the age of 15. Again, in rural towns, just like urban towns, once you're kind of targeted by the police, you're targeted. I couldn't go anywhere without usually getting arrested. So I spent a lot of my younger adult life in and out of incarceration for drugs, alcohol, running away. I mean, I was arrested for running away. So even like things that you wouldn't consider are crimes, they're called status offenses. That's usually how our young people kind of get caught up into the system. And then it just progresses from there. And I see it all the time in my work. I see it on Rikers. I see it everywhere that I go. People that are in the system, this is 9 times out of 10 the way that they got into the system to begin with. And finally, my junior year of high school, I was kicked out of my house. I'll never forget that day. It was one of the happiest days of my life, and then also realizing, you know, the next day it was one of the worst days of my life because you didn't realize all the other things that were going to come along with that, right? So I had been trying to get out of there forever. My mom packed up some of my clothes in garbage bags and threw them on the front lawn. And, you know, I called one of my friend's parents who knew everything that was going on, and they actually came and picked me up. And I remember at that day, at that moment, I cried so hard because I was just so happy to be away from my stepdad, right? But then I realized the next day, I'm an unemancipated young person. So I have no rights because I'm not emancipated. And I can't go to school because I don't have a guardian to go to school. Despite all of this, I was a really good student. Even with missing a whole bunch of days, school was always my savior. That was the only place that I didn't get abused. So I tried to like go to school and do as much as I could there. And so I'll never forget, it was that kind of waking moment where I knew that I had lost my chance of getting out of that town because now, you know, I couldn't graduate high school, and that was my one ticket out, was to get to college, right? So I'd been working my whole life really good in school, trying to know that that would be my one ticket out of that town. And unfortunately, I couldn't finish high school because I didn't have a legal guardian and I wasn't emancipated. So what ended up happening is, through my own trauma in that moment, I met somebody, I got pregnant. So again, that same cycle of, you know, being a young mother, being an addict still, having open cases and having to go to jail, not knowing what I'm going to do with my son. It was kind of the same cycle that I didn't want my son to go through. I had inadvertently found myself kind of putting him through. And I think that's definitely I have a really great relationship with my son now. He turns 19 in May. But that was the hardest thing, was to rebuild that relationship and understand that I had done a lot of bad things and I had abandoned him in a lot of ways. I was in and out of jail. I was in and out of treatment. I was not in his life. And it was my darkest moments looking back on it. It's the most thing that I regret, right? Is not being there for him the way that I should have been. So after, getting pregnant, even with my son being young, it was the same cycle, in and out of houses, staying with friends here, staying with people here. I lived in all over the place. I mean, I've probably lived in more places than a lot of other people, even just in the state of Illinois, but then outside of the state of Illinois as well. And I kept getting into trouble. Without having a GED, my main income was committing crime, right? I was selling drugs. I was not doing what was right. And of course, incarceration comes with that. And I think, my deep-seated trauma from that lifetime of abuse was something that I had never even really had a real counselor talk about. Counselors had always talked to me about stop doing drugs, stop doing this, right? But they never really understood kind of the root causes of why I was doing drugs. And it took a long time for me to finally find a counselor into my 20s that actually kind of understood that. So again, I moved around. I ended up in New York City in 2008. I was not out here to do what was right. I was out here with a group of people. We were in LA at the time, and I moved out here. So I will never say that I came out here to do what was right. I definitely came out here to do, illegal acts. And I ended up spending 4 months at the Rose M. Singer Center before going to an upstate prison. So I, knew that I was facing a lot of time. The Rose M. Singer Center, I'll never forget my first day there. We were in intake, and there was a woman in the bullpen screaming because she was hungry. All she wanted was food, and the officers wouldn't feed her. So she had to grab the garbage can and pull it towards the bars, and she had to put her hands in the garbage can and eat the food that was in the garbage. That's what Rikers Island is. I don't think people understand how bad it is and how bad it's been there for 95 years that it's been in play, right? Like, my story is no different from the women that are there right now. The abuse from officers, and I'm not saying that they're not incarcerated people that are not abusing people also, that's not what I'm saying, but the abuse that you experience from officers and the constant reminder that you can be raped at any moment and there's nothing that you can do about it. As a woman, especially a woman who experienced so much abuse as a child, like, we're definitely doing something wrong in society by allowing our women to kind of go through that. So, after Rosie's, all I wanted to do was get upstate. And I know that's sad to say, but there's so many people in jail in New York City on Rikers Island that just want to get upstate and go to prison, because while it's not that much better upstate, it is definitely better than Rikers Island, right? Like, you feel a little bit safer than what you do on the island. And I spent 2 years upstate, and I think this last prison bid up here, this prison sentence up here, I really found my purpose, for sure. I had got my GED throughout the years and all of this, and I went to my counselor and I told him I just wanted to work as a law clerk, because I knew how many women were inside that were in there for charges that they probably had nothing to do with. A lot of times it's the boyfriend that's selling drug and the girlfriend goes to jail as well, right? Or there's just so many nuances of how the women get inside. And I knew that, and I'd seen that from, again, rural counties to urban counties, Cook County and Chicago to all over. It's the same no matter where you go. And so he gave me the chance to work as a law clerk. Again, all I had was my GED. And I taught myself everything inside and out. It was 25 cents an hour, and I still say to this day it was one of the best jobs I ever had, because I really got to help women. So, again, being inside, I got to do Article 78 motions. I got to help women get their kids back, or even start to try the process of how to get their kids back. So many of them were in the system, and their children were in ACS, and they hadn't seen them for so long, because it's definitely a bureaucratic system, and children often, if they're in ACS, don't get to visit their parents like they're supposed to, right? And I know there's a lot that plays into that with lack of resources, but it's definitely, I think, the hardest thing as a mother, to not be able to see your child, and know that you want to be better when you get released, but there's really no resources for that. And I remember being inside, I saw so many of the women that reminded me of myself and my mother. and how many had experienced abuse. You know, we talk about the statistics right now at Rosie's, but it's pretty much the same upstate. 86% of the women, there's about 252 women on Rosie's right now at Rikers. 86% of them have serious mental illness. That's schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD, major depression. 77% experience sexual violence as a child. 80% are single moms. So all of the women that I saw inside were me. Like I think I had never found, that's one thing that I found in jail and prison was a whole bunch of folks that had went through the same trauma that I had and I could really relate to. And so it's sad, but that gave me a family, and I still talk to, you know, so many of the women that I was inside with. I still work with them. We hire them at our jobs now. But it really did create that sense of family and that sense of a community that I'd only otherwise found in gangs. No, never in my community, right? My original village of 850 people, they just threw us all aside, but I, you know, definitely found it in the areas that we think are bad, right? And so to me, it was very conflicting and confusing, and I grew up a lot like that as well. So again, you know, working as a law clerk also showed me that I had a voice and I could advocate in a different way. So I've been fighting systems my whole life, but I wasn't using the proper tools. Instead of using fists and guns and knives, I needed to be using a pen and a piece of paper and my voice, right? And the voices of others with lived experience. And so I definitely think there was a turning point while I was in Beacon Correctional Facility in New York State, that I realized I could be an advocate in a different way. We had women that used to come in with such severe health issues that there was no way they could work. I mean, one of them's arm and leg didn't work on one whole side. She had a massive stroke. And they still had her trying to push a push mower that was like 110 pounds. And if you didn't, you got sent to solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is like basically being put in a closet and kind of being psychologically tortured. So I was the one that got to write the chief medical officer in Albany and get her moved, right? When the officers didn't care. And when the superintendent didn't care about black mold falling down on us while we were showering, I wrote the commissioner in Albany, and he came and changed the ductwork, which had been put in wrong for 30 years. Women had been smelling.
Okay. Is this yours?
That's why we have such
Yes, put it there.
horrible health conditions.
No, on table.
Right. And little known fact about Rikers Island. Rikers Island is built
Bed.
on toxic
Huh?
rain.
Why was it in the room?
When NYC
I did
completed
fail
the
there.
subway system, all of that waste from the subway system was put on Rikers Island, and then they built the jails over that waste. So it's not just the incarcerated people that suffered tremendously from physical conditions. There are officers that have been working there for 30 years that have cancer, right? Because of those conditions. So it impacts every single person, you know, and those are family members, right? Like our officers and our workers, those are also our family members and our community members. So we should all care about their health when they go to work, and about the health of the people that they're serving, which are detained and incarcerated New Yorkers. So I got to really use my voice in a different way. I almost got in a little bit of trouble for it because, you know, when you're incarcerated, you can't push too hard on certain things. So I definitely had some scary moments with a potential inspector general that I was not, that was making a little bit of waves from. But again, it was because we were fighting for what was right? And basic human rights. I'm talking about food. Like they have hunger strikes all the time because they don't have food, right? Like those are very basic that we would expect everyone to be able to eat. So when I got released from upstate prison, I began as an intern 2 months later at the Fortune Society. And the Fortune Society is actually in Long Island City. They've been around 50 years. They fight for people who are justice impacted. Half their staff are justice impacted. They're a national reentry organization. And I'll never forget when I met them. I told the HR director, I said, I have no professional skills, but I do this. Like I live in this work. I know our people. Like I know I can help make things better. Just give me a chance. And she did. She gave me an internship opportunity at like $10 an hour. And I was the happiest person in the world. I just wanted to start. And since that time, that was in 2012. So since that time, it's 10 years. Now I'm vice president of an organization and I have my master's degree. So I've worked really hard over the last 10 years to put in all the work that I needed to do and really be able to be an agent for change out here. I also, get to sit on several city appointed commissions. So I'm on the borough-based peer review team for the Queens Jail. I helped, like I said, helped pass the Renewable Rikers. So I'm on their advocacy coalition with the mayor's office to really make sure that the renewable energy goes the way that we want it to, and they don't try to take it for something else. And so it's been I always say I have to pinch myself because coming from a village of 850 people, I never thought in a million years I'd be like, having the mayor call me and ask me for information and to be like an expert in these areas. So it's definitely full circle. And I speak openly about the violence, abuse, and dehumanization that all people experience while incarcerated, as well as the root causes of what got them incarcerated. And those stats I said earlier are super important because no one wakes up and says, I want to go harm someone today, right? There's always some deep-seated trauma, mental health condition, substance use condition, are definitely our normalization of violence and what we've done in certain communities around gangs, like how we perceive them. We're kind of doing it the opposite way, right? Like we could come together more collectively and kind of understand that for a lot of those young kids, that gang's their only family. So how do we teach them how to use their family for good purposes as opposed to harming people, right? Instead of just saying, oh, you have to give your family up. Because every one of us would not say that we would want to just throw our family away tomorrow, right? We would all want to give the benefit of the doubt, the chances, and try to help like come to that mediation and middle. And I'm always saying like a lot of those young leaders can be leaders just like I am today, right? Like I hurt people for a long time when I was hurt. Now I heal people because I'm healed. So all people can do that. We need to kind of break down that stigma and think that people can't change. We can all change, right? I see it every single day and we all see it every single day. And also, back to some of the passages today, I think back of how lost I was and how lost in my faith I was, how lost in my trauma I was, how lost in everything that I was, and how I feel like I'm found now in such a different way, right? That I really know my purpose, I understand my purpose, I have a community with shared purposes, and us coming together, like I know what I'm supposed to do now, right? And for so long, I was just so lost. So Reverend Jeff spoke about how we met a few weeks ago, and it was so funny because as we were meeting, the former mayor, Bill de Blasio, was actually in the cafe that we were in. So it was just such a crazy coincidence that like you see people, it's only in New York City that you kind of see folks like that. And when I met with him, I talked about just being an ambassador for this work and how our faith, whether that's grounded in religion or spirituality, it preaches forgiveness, and how the readings that he had talked about of what he was going to do today, how it welcomes sinners and eats with them, right? So when the Bible says my son was dead and is alive again, that's when I say hurt people, and heal people, heal people. It's that same concept, right? That no matter what someone does, I work with folks that have had severe violent charges in the past. And they're some of the nicest people that you would have ever met. You would have never guessed that was the charge that they had. And it's because, they were in their trauma in that moment, or there was some situation, it was like an extenuating circumstance. They weren't ever really like their soul. I always try to tell it to people, even when I did bad things, like I had made mistakes, and yes, I did bad things, but that didn't mean that I was an overall bad person. I've always cared about people. I've always tried to help people. I've always helped, other friends that I had and girls get out of their abusive relationships and leave their parents. I mean, there were so many acts of activism that I've done throughout my life that when I look back, yes, I made a lot of mistakes and I did a lot of bad acts, but that didn't mean that I was like an inherently bad person. That I had a lot of good in me also. And I think now I can recognize that and see that. I also stopped judging myself for everything that happened in the past. And that really allowed me to be free, right? And feel free and heal myself in a different way. So again, I think sometimes what I see on this end is when people are released, and I experienced a lot of discrimination in this neighborhood when I first moved in, I'm not gonna lie, it was really tough. And even just a year and a half ago, I experienced more trying to get an apartment. I couldn't believe that I've been here for 7 years and I'm a VP and have a master's degree, and they still were looking at my convictions from 20 years ago and saying, no, we're not renting to you. After I had my landlord put in like a great word, I've never had a late payment. I've never had a noise complaint. I was like, well, what more do I have to do to just get an apartment, right? Like you shouldn't have to, the more that we keep doing that to folks, then it like breaks them down even further, right? Like the more we continue to judge, then they continue to judge themselves, right? And so if we really want to stop doing that and help people heal, we can do that as a community without judging folks, while still holding them accountable. I'm not saying we should not hold people accountable. We absolutely need to. Accountability should be at the forefront. We just don't need to use punitive measures to do so, right? There can be another way. So again, like I was broken down and my soul was trapped in trauma, and I hurt people. I committed crime. When I found a community that provided me with the resources and skills that I needed, I was able to succeed, and now I'm healed and I'm able to heal people. The message of reconciliation has been entrusted to all of us. So it's my responsibility to stand before you all today to help you see that all people can change, but that change only occurs when we lead with love. And I'm always talking to folks about, really sitting down, understanding the situation, not, buying into fear mongering, no facts over fear, right? And I understand when people are afraid that if they don't understand something, that's how their reaction can be. But we've got to, as a community, come stronger together and say, no, facts over fear. Like, we're not going to listen to the folks that keep trying to keep us afraid and say that people can't change, because that's not true. I have worked with hundreds of thousands of people that are just like me that have changed. And when we open our hearts and see the whole person instead of only seeing their worst mistakes. So we talk a lot at Exodus. One of our taglines is, you are greater than your worst mistake, because people walk in the doors often still owning their worst mistake and feeling stuck in that worst mistake that they made. And so we're always trying to get folks to that future thought of how you can own your greatness. You are greater than your worst mistake, and you can find redemption in this life, right? And when we understand the root causes that lead people to crime, we can invest in their healing in a different way too. So that's why I shared my story today, so people could not see me for the 6 felonies and 30 misdemeanors that I have across 3 different states, that they could see me for the work that I'm doing now and for the person that I am today, and understanding that while I made mistakes, there was a lot of harm that I was experiencing as well. And so that harm and that trauma physiologically changes you, right? And it changes your behaviors. And so you can overcome that and heal from that. And I always am talking to folks about not staying stuck in that trauma, because that's just going to keep you in that vicious cycle, and it's going to keep you harming folks also. And none of us want to harm people, right? So how do we break out of that? And I just want to end a little bit on, I run the women and girls group at Exodus. Oh, I just love my girls so much. 14 to 24. I'm a VP, and yes, I still facilitate groups. And I tell my boss I will never give that up, because I will never forget where I came from, or I will never not be close to the ground and to what's going on in real time. And, my girls, every cohort I get them, and every cohort, it's so sad to say that it's the same, kind of experiences that they're all going through. I'm happy that after each cohort, I've got them in college and in jobs, and I just got one into her own apartment. It's her very first own apartment. So she's in the office on Friday. And let me tell you, we hustle for our girls. So she comes in and, she's got the apartment, but she has nothing else. I said, don't worry, we're going to find you everything. So, here, and I'm always taking donations for clothes, equipment, housing stuff, anything, whatever you can donate. Like, I will take, store, and find someone to give it to, because there is always a need. And we move a lot of people into their own apartments, their very first own apartments. So I did my neighbors. I live right on 76 Road between Austin and Queens Boulevard. And my little community kind of over there, those blocks, they all know who I am. I've been out here forever, and they know that that's what I do, so they can leave stuff outside my door and everything. So my neighbor, she calls me and she says, oh, I'm getting rid of this stuff. can you come get it? I said, absolutely. So I come get it. I got everything stacked in my living room. And so I call one of my girls, and she's 19. She just got her own first apartment. It's supportive housing, right? So she definitely has a lot of things that she's still working on, but she's been in foster care her life. So proud. The smile she had on her face and the tears that she had in her eyes, nothing can beat that, right? And so I tell her all the stuff that I got. And then I said, okay, I'm going to have one of my workers go drop it off to you right now. And we always send a girl, one of my women staff with, because all my girls have experienced DV or sexual abuse. So I do not send men alone to do anything, right? Even though I trust those men, it is for them, for the participant, that they can feel secure, because they don't know that guy, right? And so I know that. So I send them up there, and she was blown away at all the stuff I got. And I said, don't worry, I got you a TV that's coming next week also. And like something else that we ordered for her, a dresser and like a little nightstand. So I said, everything's gonna get mailed to you. We'll help you come put everything together. I even had like the maintenance guy with my other staff hang stuff up for her and kind of like do all that. And, she just looked at me and she was like, no one has ever loved me the way that you all love me. She said, I have never once felt supported like this in my whole life. And I think it's so sad that there's so many in New York City, in the richest city in the world, in the most quote unquote progressive city in the world, right? That I have cohorts and cohorts and cohorts of my girls, and they come from everywhere, Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, Harlem, they come from everywhere, that say that we are the first place that they have actually felt truly loved, like unconditionally loved and supported. And we are so strong together, right? I've been doing a lot of speaking, not like this with faith-based communities, but not like on the podium, but just in community with you all, of how we, like as a faith-based community, can come together and really like help break these cycles and help support, especially these young girls, young boys. I mean, I have 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds that were sex slaves that were brought over here that I'm taking away from their pimps, right? Like, that's how serious it is. And this is 2022 in New York City, and it happens every day. So I definitely wanted to leave on that note of that story, because, we can be the change that we wish to see in this world. When we all do a little, it adds up to a lot. I love how she spoke about that earlier, and it's so true. Like, everyone just pitching in a little bit would make such a big difference in the lives of our young people. And then we could break that intergenerational mass incarceration cycle, right? That's how we do it. It's really getting to them while they're young and providing them with the resources that they need. And, definitely we can all look at people with criminal convictions free from stigma. If we see people discriminated against, justice impacted people, we can step up and stand up and say, no, this is wrong, right? I'm on the Neighborhood Advisory Council in Kew Gardens, and, it was a rough couple years. I hear a lot of folks that are thinking about fear over facts, right? And not really, like, I've had one guy who's adamant that mental health is a choice. And I'm like, where are we at? Like, what planet am I on right now that we're still kind of at that level, right? So I think the more that we can all hold each other accountable and just educate one another, talk to our family members, and again, talk to people like me who are justice impacted. Like, don't be afraid. And I can definitely help navigate things for you and educate in whatever way. And I think we can remember all the verses that Reverend Jeff quoted and practice them. We can treat each other the way that we want to be treated. So thank you.
I don't think I could have given a better sermon. That was awesome. Thank you, Kendra. We're going to invite people downstairs. There's some refreshments, there's some lemonade. So Kendra, if you can stay after today and you can meet with her a little bit afterwards. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Our hymn is number 418, Softly and Tenderly, Jesus is Calling. Let us rise and sing this together.